I am Dr. Balakrishna K, working in Department of Electronics and Communication as Assistant Professor at Maharaja Institute of Technology, Mysore. In today's class, I will be discussing about the fifth module, that is optical networks in the fiber optics networks. Module 5. It will be dealing about the optical network. See, we know that when you consider about the fiber optic networks, we are all dealing with respect to an optical fiber. Here the transmission medium will be an optical fiber. Mainly it will be used for an telecommunication or a network. Here this particular module 5 will be discussing about how the networking can be happened with respect to your optical fiber. See, if you consider with respect to a networking, what is networking? Normally we are already studying in your different subjects, that is what is networking. Networking is nothing but, if you consider with respect to general definition, networking will be considered as a common point where all the particular node or anything will be connecting with respect to a particular place. That will be considered as a networking. See, we can take a live examples where you will be having a different things. The things can be a computers, camera or anything, where all that will be connected with respect to a single point, where you will be having access for all these particular connectivity things with respect to a single point. That connectivity between the things and this particular single point will be considered as a networking. Normally this networking should be a closed one. It should be a closed one. Let's go with respect to the introduction. With respect to optical network, I will be starting with respect to introduction. How the evolution has been done with respect to this particular generation. Normally, if you consider with respect to a generation, that is, we all know about the telecommunication. Normally, if you are considering with respect to telecommunication, we will be having a evolution of the generation that will be considered as an 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, and right now we are in the 5G experimentally. So, when we are considering with respect to these conditions, we will be having a different generation where the G will be standing for a generation here. So, based on these conditions, we will be having a switching bit rate. The switching rate here. Normally, the switching rate has been started from 10 to the power of minus 1, 10 to the power of minus 3, 10 to the power of minus 6, and it will be considered as a 10 to the power of minus 9. And we will be having a different generation. I will be writing a block with respect to mentioning the generation here. Let us consider it as an first generation, first G. The G stands for a generation here. And similarly, after the first generation, you will be having a second generation. Here also the G stands for a generation. And you will be having a third generation. Let's mention here as an years. This will be considered as an third generation. But after the third generation, you will be having a fourth generation and fifth generation with respect to telecommunication for mobile communication and all. With respect to your syllabus, you will be studying up to the third generation. It's enough for you to learn till the third generation. Let's start with the first generation. If you consider with respect to mobile communication, I already said your optical fiber will be used for the telecommunication purpose. So what is the purpose of a telecommunication? You need to transmit a data. That data can be in voice. It can be of any videos or anything in the form of a data from one place to another place. That will be considered as a source to destination. And the distance can be of n number of distance. That is, when you are considering with respect to distance, it can start from a few kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, or even thousands of kilometers. You can connect till further with respect to this particular optical fiber communication. To make a connectivity between a short distance, long distance, you are using a different types of technologies with respect to this particular optical network. So we will be studying about this particular, how the connectivity can be established from varying one generation to second generation, second to third, and so on. So if you consider with respect to the telecommunication, how the telecommunication started. Normally, if you consider the telecommunication, the optical fiber are used for the telecommunication, and this evolution has been started in the year 1980s. In the earliest 1980s, you are not using the any generation, you don't have any generation with respect to the communication with respect to optical fiber. After the 1980s, you are started with respect to first generation, where in this particular first generation you will be using this particular first generation will be used for an data transmission from one place to another place. I already said that one place to another place will be considered as an source to destination. How the data can be transferred here? Normally in the first generation, the data will be transferred with respect to an analog form. Here the data will be transferred with respect to an analog form, where you will be having a various disadvantages with respect to this particular first generation. What are the disadvantages? Normally the bandwidth will be very low, and the battery also will be very low, and there will be no effective communications with respect to the first generation, and there will be a borrowing of calls with respect to the first generation will be also done. So to overcome this particular, whatever the disadvantages you will be having with respect to first generation, we would move with respect to second generation, where the second generation has been started in the year 1990s. Where if you consider with respect to the 1990s, you will be started with respect to the second generation, where you are trying to use the different technologies. That technologies will be considered as an SONET or SDH. The SONET and SDH are a different techniques where you are used for the networking with respect to the optical communication. What is this SONET and SDH? Normally, if you consider the SONET or SDH, these are considered as an communication protocol. These both are an communication protocol. See, with respect to SONET and SDH, it will be used to data transmission from one place to another place, where it will be used as a communication protocol. What is the abbreviation of this means? The SONET will be considered as an here synchronous optical network. It will be abbreviated as an synchronous optical network, where the SDH will be abbreviated as an synchronous digital hierarchy. These are all the two different communication protocol we will be using for the data transmission, where it will be working with respect to an time division multiplexing technology, that is TDM. You will be knowing about the how the time division multiplexing will be working. It will be working based on the time division multiplexing. So if you consider with respect to this particular second generation, the first generation will be working based on the analog form, where it has been, when you consider with respect to the second generation, the analog form will be converted into digital form. The second generation has been started to work based on the digital transmission. So based on the particular digital transmission, we are supposed to go with respect to the communication protocol, where it will be working based on the time division multiplexing. That particular communication protocol are called as an SONET and SDH. That is a synchronous optical network and a synchronous digital hierarchy. So when you consider with respect to this particular second generation, you will be having a wavelength routing. I will be considering it as an wavelength routing. At the end of this particular second generation, we were using the wavelength routing. So wavelength is nothing but you will be having a different wavelength with respect to the optical signals. When you consider with respect to your optical signals, you can transmit a n number of signals with respect to single bandwidth, because you will be using a time division multiplexing, where depending upon the particular wavelength it will be identify where that particular signal has to be transmitted. That is depending upon the destination, which destination that particular value should be, or that particular information should be go out. So based on this particular wavelength routing, this wavelength routing will make your signals to transmit at the particular point. For that you can take examples. If you consider wavelength routing, I will be having a single point. I will be considering it as a single point, and I will be having a different signals. Let's consider that as that is L1, L2 and L3. Why I am using a, sorry, this is not L1, there is a lambda 1, lambda 2 and lambda 3. Why I am using a lambda 1 here, lambda 2, lambda 3 means the lambda will be called as a wavelength, where I will be having a different wavelength. That is lambda 1 will be having it, that will be the different wavelength, this will be the another different wavelength, this will be specifying the another different wavelength. So when you are transmitting with respect to an optical fiber, I will be considering it as an optical fiber, where you will be transmitting all this particular wavelength with respect to a single bandwidth, where this particular wavelength should be reached at the particular distance. So the first, the lambda 3 has to be received, and again the lambda 1 and lambda 2, and I will be considering it as a point A, point B, and this will be considered as a point C, where all this information, that is the 3 different information which will be having a different wavelength, are transmitted at the source point, and it will be transmitted through a channel. That channel is nothing but optical fiber channel, which will be having a single bandwidth, where it has to be reached at the different point sources. This point sources is nothing but destination point. The destination point is A, destination point B, and it will be destination point C, where the lambda 3 wavelength, that wavelength is nothing but the information which will be contained with respect to lambda 3, that has to be reached at the point A. And similarly lambda 1 information, whatever the information that will be contained at lambda 1, that has to be reached at point B, and again the lambda 2 information, whatever it will be contained, that has to be reached at the point C. So this type of distributions will be considered based on the wavelength routing here. So when you are considering with respect to wavelength routing, you will be having a different node, or you will be having a multiple nodes, where the node operates, that is hopping can also be done with respect to one node to another node. Here I am showing the simple connectivity, but in this connectivity you can have a multiple hopping and all. So we will be discussing in depth about this particular wavelength routing with respect to next classes. And if you consider with respect to the third generation, see, when you consider with respect to the third generation, you will be having a higher grade with respect to the working with respect to the communication. So why we are going with respect to the first generation, second generation and the third generation and so on with respect to 4G and 5G means you will be having a upgrading with respect to technology. That technology is nothing but you will be having a upgrading with respect to speeding of your communication, and also it will use a minimum bandwidth. So based on this particular thing, we will be going with respect to 1G, 2G, 3G and so on with respect to 4G and 5G. In a similar fashion, if you consider with respect to the third generation, see, when you consider with respect to the third generation, you will be having a optical network switch. The third generations will be discussing about the switching here. So the first one, it will be using a optical, one will be considered as an optical bus switch here. This will be the one point, and again you will be having a optical circuit switch, and again you will be having a optical hybrid switch. These are all the different types of switches. Switching will be occurred with respect to your optical network. See, in this case I will be telling about the optical bus switching, optical circuit switching and optical hybrid switching. These are all the different things where it will be considered as an OBS, it will be OCS, and it will be OHS. They are all the standards with respect to the communication with respect to your network, that is optical networking, where we will be studying in depth about the coming classes about this particular optical switching here. So next we will be moving with respect to, that is optical network concepts. See, when you consider with respect to the optical network concepts, see, before going with respect to the optical network concepts, why we need to study this optical network and what is the purpose of studying this particular concept will be the main thing here. See, normally if you consider with respect to optical network, I already said that network, what is the network and what is this particular optical, because here the medium, the transmission medium is nothing but a optical fiber. If you consider with respect to wireless technology, the transmission medium will be in a air, so it will be considered as a wireless. In a wired technology, you can have a transmission medium like different types of transmission medium. You can go with respect to copper cable and a optical fiber, where we are learning about this particular optical fiber, and so on. You will be having it, and also you can go with respect to coaxial cable. But here we are studying with respect to optical fiber. So here the transmission medium from a source to destination will be considered as an optical fiber. So we will be considering this particular as an optical network here. So I already said what is the networking and how the networking will be working generally, and how the this particular networking will be working with respect to this particular optical fiber here. So let's go with respect to some concept here. I will take one example. Let's take one example. See, if you consider with respect to an optical fiber concept, you will be having a, that is different nodes. So I will be writing a node here. So this particular point will be considered as an node here. These are all the nodes. See, I will be having a connectivity like this from one node to another node. One can have a connectivity like this, where this will be considered as a node. These are all the nodes. I will be having a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nodes here, and this will be considered as a physical link. Where you will be having a physical link that will be considered as an optical fibers are connected between the one node to another node. They are connected physically. For that reason, I will be calling it as a physical link. And I assume that I will be having a two different wavelengths. I will be writing in a different color here. Let's consider this will be considered as an one wavelength, that will be considered as an lambda 1, and I will be having a another wavelength that will be considered as an lambda 2. So how the wavelength will be transmitting from one place to another place. I will be having a predefined path, where based on this particular predefined path, I will be transmitting my wavelength from a source to destination. So this particular point will be considered as an, so this will be considered as a source, and this will be considered as an destination. I need to transmit my information from a source to destination with a predefined path. So whether you can go with respect to a predefined path, or you can use your own path, that can be a shortest path, anything can be taken care. But let's go with respect to this will be the first optical network concept. So I will be going with respect to a predefined path. So if you consider with respect to this particular lambda 1, that will be considered as an information that will be passing with respect to this particular node, and where it will be passing again it can pass with respect to two particular node, because you cannot transmit this information to this particular node, or you cannot transmit with respect to this particular node here. If there is having a physical link only, you can transmit this particular information from one node to another node. In a similar fashion, if you are transmitting this particular information, means you will be having a physical contact with respect to this node and this node, where there will be not having a physical contact with respect to this node. So you will be having a two possibilities. You can go, or you can select with respect to this particular node or this particular node. So based on this particular thing, I will be selecting this one here. So again, if I will be having a predefined values, I should receive the signal at this particular values. That is a lambda 1 where information has to be received at this particular value, and lambda 2 has to be received at this particular value. These are all the predefined one. Again, if you consider this particular concept, I will be having it, that is lambda 1, where this lambda 1 should be received at this particular point. Again, the information has been transmitted with respect to this particular node. Again, if you consider with respect to this node, where this particular node will be transmitting only in a one way to the another node. That is, it will be having a connectivity with respect to only one point, because it cannot retransmit the information in a backward. It has to be transmitted with respect to a frontward. So you will be having a connectivity with respect to the, in a clockwise direction, you will be having a connectivity with respect to this particular one node. So it has to be transmitted in this particular direction. Or if you are making connectivity, if there is a physical contact with respect to this, like this, in these cases you can transmit the information to either this particular node or this particular node. So based on this particular node, I can select whether I need to transmit my signal to this particular node or this particular node. I can choose my own path here. So again, here I will be using this particular node. See, if you consider this particular node, again here this will be considered as an output port, but my information, that is lambda 1, should be reached at this particular node, where it will be, this particular node will be predefined to receive only the lambda 2 information. So again, in this case also, whatever the information that will be transmitting with respect to lambda 1, that has to be transmitted with respect to this particular node. So again, here I will be receiving the information. So this is the path to transmit my information from a source to destination. That will be the lambda 1. See how here the lambda 1 will be passing with respect to node from here to here and here to here, and finally it will be reached the destination through this particular point here. Again, if you consider with respect to the lambda 2, I will be writing with respect to a white chalk piece here. I will be considering it as a dotted line. The thick line will be considered as an light path. Let's consider it as an light path. That will be considered as a physical link. Light path here. So if you consider that is lambda 2, the dotted line will be considered as a light path here. Here the lambda 2 will be transmitting at this particular node here. So if this particular lambda 2 has been placed here, means it will be directly reaching till this particular node, because the second connectivity, the second node will be not having a connectivity with respect to any other particular node other than this particular node here. So similarly, I will be having a source point with respect to this particular node for the both lambda 1 and lambda 2. So if you consider with respect to lambda 2, it can transmit to this particular point, or it can transmit with respect to this particular point here. So both can be accepted here. Let's take the same destination. This will be considered as a light path. So the lambda 2 information has been passed from this particular node to this particular node, where again I can transmit the information of lambda 2 with respect to this particular node or this particular node. here I will be transmitting with respect to this direction. I will be transmitting with respect to this direction. So after reaching this particular node, I will be not having any connectivity other than the particular one connectivity. So it will be easily passing with respect to this particular node here. But this particular node will be considered as a destination where the information can be considered as an output with respect to this particular point. But here my lambda 2 information destination has been already predefined. So based on this concept, I will be writing again the information will be retransmitted with respect to these conditions, and I will be getting the information with respect to this condition. So this is how the optical network concepts will be working with respect to your connectivity. This is the one example considering how the network connectivity will be done with respect to a optical fiber networks. Here the three things you need to be considered. One will be considered as a node here, where the information will be hopping from a one node to another node. You can go with respect to multi-hopping also here. And the second one is physical link or physical content, that will be considered as an how the optical fiber has been connected with respect to one node to another node, because you should have a connectivity with respect to one node to another node through and specifically with respect to an optical fiber here. And the third path is nothing but a light path, because whatever the information you are transmitting from a source to destination, in between you will be having a multiple number of nodes here. All that will be transmitting with respect to a light source. All that particular information will be transmitting in the form of a light here. So that particular thing I will be calling it as a light paths here. So based on this concept, I can go with respect to, that is terminology, that is networking terminology. If you consider networking terminology, see, optical networking terminology. So if you consider with respect to an optical networking terminology, you will be having a different types of terminology. Like if you consider an example, bus terminology, the bus networking, and also you can go with respect to mesh connectivity and ring, and you can go with respect to your own, that will be considered as a hybrid. These are all the different things if you are considering with respect to networking terminology.